Did you know that roughly 10% of our thoughts involve comparing ourselves to others? And that people who report frequent social comparisons are more likely to experience negative emotions like envy, guilt, regret, blame, and defensiveness? Unfortunately, we can't just simply switch off the thought of comparing ourselves to others, because it's just a natural thing that we as humans do. However, especially in our time of excessive social media use, AI, and increasing social pressures, we need to know and learn how to navigate social comparison if we don't want to end up deeply unhappy, inconfident, or anxious. And this is why I'm very excited that in today's video we will look into the different forms of comparison, when comparison turns toxic, and 4 practical hacks that you can implement today in order to make you the main character of your life. If you're new here, my name is Simon and I'm an accountability partner. Over the past 3 years, I have coached people to define and reach their goals by implementing tools and systems in order to hold them accountable. And I'm doing this because I'm very passionate about this topic. And because those systems and tools have helped me to build the life that I always wanted. On this channel, I upload weekly videos about ideas, tools, and strategies to build a life that you love. And one super important building block in order to build the life that you love is to stop comparing ourselves to others. Also, I'm currently offering free introduction calls with me, so if you have troubles reaching or defining your goals, just click the link below and book a call with me. Before we look at 4 practical hacks that you can implement into your life today, let's first look at the different forms of comparisons: upward comparison, downward comparison, and lateral comparison. Upward comparison is something that happens when you look upward. So if you compare yourself to someone that you see as superior as yourself. That could be, for example, if you're a footballer, that you compare yourself to someone like Cristiano Ronaldo or Messi, or if you're an aspiring YouTuber in the entertainment sector, that you compare yourself to someone like Mr. Beast. An upward comparison, especially in times of excessive social media use, is one of the most relevant forms of comparisons. And the original and healthy purpose of upward comparison is usually that you get motivated by the person that is ahead of you that you compare yourself to. However, what usually happens is that you start comparing yourself to someone who's way further down the line and way ahead of you, which makes the gap between you and the individual that you compare yourself to way too big. And what happens then is usually that the initial motivation quickly turns into envy, self-doubt, or even self-paralysis. The second of the most relevant form of comparison is downward comparison. And it's basically the exact opposite of upward comparison, because you don't compare yourself to someone who is a step ahead of you, but you start comparing yourself to someone who you think is worse off than you. And again, the original and healthy purpose of downward comparison is usually to protect your self-esteem in order to feel grateful or confident. However, also here, if the gap between you and the person that you compare yourself becomes too big, instead of the positivity that you take away from downward comparison, it will end in arrogance, complacency, or self-comfort, which can also be very toxic traits. The third and last form of comparison that we will talk about today is lateral comparison. And that basically means that you start comparing yourself to someone that you see on the same level as yourself. All forms of social comparison, also lateral comparison, has a healthy origin. And the original purpose was to build social belonging and competition. But you probably guessed it at this point that also lateral comparison can turn toxic. And that is when it leads to hidden rivalry, imposter syndrome, or resentment. Now that we have talked about the 3 most relevant forms of social comparison that we face in our life, we can now look at what turns a healthy form of comparison into a toxic one. Because as mentioned before, all forms of comparison have good intention but can easily turn toxic. And that can easily happen when comparison feels unbridgeable, when it's based on fiction and not reality, and when it makes you forget your own values. And maybe you have guessed it by now, but excessive social media use is hitting all 3 boxes. Because obviously before the internet we would only compare ourselves to our direct neighbors or our smaller inner circle. But in times of social media, we get a peek into every person's private life, and even if they live at the other side of the world, we start comparing ourselves to a person that lives a completely different life. And through this, social media makes comparison feel totally unbridgeable. And what happened now is that all of a sudden top performers like athletes or artists make you believe that you are their best friend. They give you a peek into their curated private life and make you feel like you're their friend, and you start naturally comparing yourself to someone that you deem way ahead of yourself. And if you continuously compare yourself to someone that is way ahead of yourself, the bridge between you and that person becomes unbridgeable, and upward comparison is turning toxic. And once a form of social comparison turns toxic, this is a direct path to unhappiness, inconfidence, and maybe even anxiousness. Another problem with excessive social media use is that it's based on fiction and not reality. Because I already mentioned that superstars that you now deem your friend give you a curated peek into their private life. And the important word here is curated, because it's not reality. And that what you see on social media is not reflecting reality is obviously nothing new. But we have to constantly remind ourselves that whatever we watch online is a performance. We watch carefully curated content that is sold as reality and totally leaves out the price that this person had to pay in order to be at the position that they are, or the sacrifices that they had to make in their lives. And when you start comparing your reality, your life, because you of course know what your life really looks like, to the fiction that you see online, upward comparison turns again toxic. Because you're comparing your reality to some form of curated, perfect life, and of course that seems then way out of reach and therefore allows feelings of inadequacy into your life. And finally, excessive social media use is also making you forget your own values, which is the third thing that quickly can turn healthy comparison into a toxic form of comparison. What happens if you're constantly doom scrolling on your phone on social media? You're basically numbing your brain and you're not allowing your own thoughts to navigate your life, and you start forgetting your own values. Over a longer period of time, you will start replacing what your own goals would be with other people's goals that you get influenced by online. And once you start running after goals that are not defined by your own thoughts but by comparison online, you will start to slowly but surely steer your life in a direction that you don't really want. Okay, now that we have looked at the three most relevant forms of comparison and we know when they turn toxic, we can now look at the 4 practical hacks that you can implement today in order to keep your social comparison at a healthy level. And the first practical hack is a question that you should ask yourself when you catch yourself comparing yourself to others. And that question is this comparison that I'm making right now fair? Because the goal with hack 1 is to make yourself conscious when you're doing an unfair comparison. And let me explain what I mean by unfair comparison, because we don't really choose who we compare ourselves to. What usually happens is that our brain starts comparing ourselves to the highlights of other people's life. It's comparable to you going into a grocery shop and your brain telling you, okay, I want this person's financial situation, or I want this person's fitness level, or I want this person's cooking skills. And that is of course an unfair comparison, because you compare yourself to the skills of multiple people at the same time. And there's no way that you can integrate all those talents into your own life at the same level that they have. We basically often pick and choose the skills and ability of other people and start comparing ourselves as individuals to the best skills of others. But obviously there is no way of reaching that standard, and therefore it is an unfair comparison. It is also unfair to compare yourself as a junior football player to someone like Cristiano Ronaldo. Why? Because Cristiano Ronaldo has been playing football since he was probably 3 years old. He has barely done anything else in his life but to play football. He has a team of coaches that not only coach him with football skills but also nutrition, sleep, and whatever it is. So of course, naturally, if you compare yourself to someone so far ahead of you, it is just simply an unfair advantage, because no matter how hard you try, you will most likely not have the same resources in your current situation as someone that far ahead of you. So next time you catch comparing yourself, ask the question if it's a fair or unfair comparison. The second hack that you can implement today is to put systems over goals. And what that means is that you have to concentrate on what you have control over, and then let the rest figure itself out. And a perfect example for that could be myself, because I just recently started this YouTube channel and I could easily start comparing myself to others way more experienced YouTubers than myself. I could look at their subscriber numbers, I could look at their views, I could look at the comments that they get on the video, but of course this is barely in my control. All I can control is how often I post a week, the quality of the videos that I can improve, the topics that I choose to talk about, my skill of talking to camera, and so on. Those are the things that I can control, and therefore this is also what I should compare myself to others. So what are the skills that I'm learning and not what are the outcomes of it? Because if I would compare myself to numbers like subscribers, views, or comments, it would easily turn into a toxic comparison and would negatively impact my motivation, consistency, and progress towards my goals. And therefore ask yourself what is your goal and what you can control in order to get closer to it. And stop comparing yourself on values that you don't have direct control over. The third hack is to stop worshipping your heroes. And that is an important one. Because most people that are top performers, like maybe top artists, top athletes, or the richest people in the world, are people that usually got good at one single skill at the sacrifice of everything else. If you look at Elon Musk, for example, and take a look at his net worth, it's easy to see him as a hero. But what is also just as true as him being a multi-billionaire and one of the richest people in the world is that he has absolutely no balance in other parts of his life. Because what he rarely talks about is the cost of him being one of the richest people in the world. Because he has worked so hard smart that his entire private life is in shambles. Or someone like Cristiano Ronaldo, they rarely talk about the price that they had to pay in order to be in the position that they're in right now. Now, the fourth and last hack that I want to give in this video is to focus on yourself and your own progress. And to make that point clear, I want you to imagine that you just started running, and after 2 kilometers you see someone running a little bit slower ahead of you. And since you're only 2 kilometers in your run and you still have a lot of energy, you start running faster and starting to pass that slower person. And while you're passing the slower person, in your mind you start comparing yourself and feel good about yourself because you yourself think that you are the better, faster and stronger runner. However, while you were feeling great about yourself and thinking about yourself that you're the better runner, this person that you just overtook was just 1 kilometer away of finishing 1 marathon distance. And what that story should tell us is that it's absolutely unnecessary in order to compare ourselves to others, because we never know the full picture of the person that we compare ourselves to. So what we should do instead is focus on our own progress, our own goals, and look at where we started and where we are today. Because this is the only way of getting a clear comparison of ourselves. Instead of comparing yourself to others where you don't know their situation, you don't know anything about them, you should start comparing yourself to the version of you 3, 6 or 9 months ago. Because that is how you get a very, very clear picture of your progress. And what that will do is that you stop thinking that other people are so far ahead of you, but it will change your mindset. Instead, we start comparing ourselves and we will say, I am such a better person than I was myself 3 months ago. Alright, this is it for today's video. I hope you were able to learn something, and if you start to implement those 4 hacks, you will save a ton of mental energy. And you will be able to start focusing on your own goals and build a life that you love. If you're interested in further tools, hacks or systems that help you to build a life that you love, click this video up here to learn all about dopamine. Because dopamine is one of the key drivers to keep us motivated in our life and to push through when things get hard. Or check out this playlist where I curated all videos about important habits that you should start implementing into your life in order to build the life that you love. Thank you for watching, and see you next week in the next video.